Excited to be here. We've got a great panel on human-centered AI. I'm Louis Lebo from the K-12 team at the Gates Foundation. Just got in from Seattle last night. It was sunny there, by the way. And nowhere I would rather be than with this amazing group of people. If I wasn't here, I would definitely not be with the million of my friends in downtown Seattle. Have a little parade this morning, celebrating a victory. Not sure what that's about. But that's okay. It's okay.
Start the panel with guilt.
I told my daughter I was going to make a couple Seahawks jokes, and she was like, "That's a room of tech nerds. I would not suggest that." But anyways, we have a fantastic panel here this morning. And as the speakers talked about this morning, we're really at a moment where AI in education has moved from possibility to reality. And the real question isn't whether AI is going to scale in learning, but how it scales, who it's designed for, and who actually benefits. And this isn't the first wave of technology that we've seen with lots of promise in education. There's been, over the past couple decades, access has scaled dramatically. Near universal internet in schools, widespread devices, digital tools that are embedded in daily instruction. But learning outcomes are still at early 2000 levels, and the trend lines are even worse for underserved students who need the support the most. Now, what's different this morning, of course, or different with AI, of course, is the capability is amazing. The speed of adoption is incredible. Patrick this morning referenced the rapid adoption. You all know tons about that. Of course, a lot of that's outside of school and without adult guidance, and that makes this moment promising, but also quite risky. On the promising side, we're seeing encouraging early evidence from AI tutoring studies, for example, which is fitting to talk about here at Stanford, the gold standard for evidence on human tutoring, which is still one of the most effective interventions we know in education, but it's expensive, it's hard to implement. Just yesterday, Susanna Loeb, who's out teaching at the moment, but will be around later, was talking to my team about one of the recent studies about human tutoring, and the results are complicated. It's challenging. But maybe AI tutoring can help with scale. Some of the recent trials we've seen have reported gains close to 2 to 4 months of additional learning. But much of this is from early stage studies, limited samples, and pretty short time horizons. So it's a signal. We'll see if the panel agrees, but not yet proof of durable system impact. And of course, we're seeing tons of work on how AI can support teachers as well, whether that's analyzing student work, surfacing misconceptions, providing instructional coaching, and some initial studies on this is really promising as well. So tons of activity going on, of course. I know we have an amazing group of people in this room who care deeply about all of this. We've got researchers and technologists and product developers and people doing the hardest job there is, the educators that are here and their students, which is fantastic. I've been just so excited to see the many collaborations that I've learned about among those usually disparate groups of people. And if this group here can figure this out, but we have to stay focused. We know that the benefits of the new technology will not automatically reach all students without intentional design and guardrails. Otherwise, AI could easily widen gaps. And so that's why this session is focused on human-centered AI. It's not just a slogan, it's a real discipline, and one that asks what evidence we require before scaling, how we design for real classrooms, and what guardrails are truly non-negotiable if these tools are going to serve all learners well. So we've got a fantastic panel, Susan, James, Ian, and Amanda. Thanks in advance for sharing your wisdom. And I'm going to get started with one question for all of you, which is, what are some examples and themes of human-centered AI in education? It's a great term. Tough to disagree that it sounds important, but what does it actually look like? What does it actually mean to you? I'll start with Susan Athey. She's an economics of technology professor here at Stanford at the business school and is a leading scholar in causal inference and market design and leads the Golub Capital Social Impact Lab, which I hope we get to hear a lot about. And so set the stage for us. How do you think about this?
Great. Well, so this is an amazing moment in time. We all know that. One of the things I've been doing over the last few years beyond actually building and measuring AI education products directly recently I've been the faculty advisor for the World Bank World Development Report for 2026 on AI. So I've been traveling all over the world trying to see, what are people building, what are people adopting, and what needs to happen to really realize our potential. And I think there's a few themes that have really come out for me. First of all, this is one reason this is an amazing moment is not just that the AI inside the products are good, but this is a moment where we've kind of democratized the ability to create products. And so people who have ideas, even non-technical people who have ideas, or people in developing countries who have ideas that previously didn't have access to engineering talent and so on, now can actually make their ideas a reality. So that's very exciting. But what that's already starting to look like on the ground, and what it may look like even more in a year or two, is actually now the bottleneck is no longer like engineers to build your ideas. The bottleneck is we have too many pilots, actually, and still not enough implementations that are actually effective. And so it's kind of obvious, but I'll just say it. As an economist, we think about scarce resources. And so again, the scarce resource was engineering, but now there's going to be some other scarce resource, some other bottleneck. A product has no value unless it's implemented and used. That's kind of obvious, but we didn't focus on it as much when we didn't have products. But if we have lots of products, now the implemented and used is like everything. And so what does it take to make that happen? Well, that's where the human-centered AI comes in the sense that we need educational science to make sure that the pilots are actually pilots of the useful things. But we also need the human-centered AI to understand the needs of the user, everything about it. What is the bandwidth constraints, the devices, the environment? If it's for teachers, what are their rubrics? What are their requirements? What is their context? And then it also needs economics. So why economics? Well, often, if you have like a school district or a government adopting something, the history of governments and school districts adopting IT products is not great. There's a lot of waste. So there's a procurement problem, there's an incentive problem. You adopt a software product, you get locked in, and then it's bad forever. And that's not just in education. Like I've asked people how many people are using Salesforce or something and they're stuck with it and they hate it. You get locked into software products. Because of that, it's terrifying to adopt them. You're going to take your teachers out of the classroom and train them on something. You're going to take your top government officials off of what they're doing to do this, and there's just a limited amount of time. So that makes people scared to adopt things. So we need to do a really good job at thinking through that whole process and making sure that when you adopt, you actually also have the ability and the incentive to achieve the potential. So that means we have to be able to measure, we have to be able to improve. These AI products are the most improvable things ever because changing software is as easy as it has ever been. But then we need to have frameworks also for thinking about what kinds of changes impose costs on the users, what can be done on the back end easily, and how can we both set up the infrastructure and incentivize the providers of software to make them better achieving educational goals for the users.
That's great, thanks. All right, thanks for setting the stage, Susan. I'm going to turn to James next to answer the same question in terms of examples and themes for human-centered AI. Right at the heart of your work, James is a professor of computer science here at Stanford, also co-founder of the Stanford Human-Computer Interaction Institute, and is one of the leading voices in HCI and how design is applied to complex technologies, including AI. So what do you think? What do you think about what Susan said? What are you seeing in your work?
Yeah, so Susan got at some of the issues here. I think one of the keys she mentioned is it's getting easier to build software, but understanding what to build is the problem. And to me, that's what this whole idea of human-centered AI is about. You can't just have the good intention to say, oh, I have this great idea. You actually have to go about designing it in a very different way than traditional software. AI systems, and especially in an area like education, more often have impact beyond the direct user of the tool. So we actually have to change how we think about design to go beyond what we would call user-centered design, which is, taken maybe 30 years to become the standard in tech companies to think about how we involve the user in the design process. And we actually now need to say we need to go beyond user-centered design to what I would call human-centered AI design, which means we need to do user-centered design, but we also need to think about the broader community that is impacted by AI systems. So you could think in an education context, I can't just design, let's say, for the teacher who might be using a system. I need to also understand how it's impacting the students, how it's impacting the families, how it's impacting other people in that community. Similarly, if we had a tutoring system for a kid, we need to think about who those other stakeholders are and bring them into the design process. Also, we need to think about even higher level effects. If an AI system becomes very successful, let's say a large percentage of school districts were using a certain system, we start to see societal level effects. So think about the effects that AI in the newsfeed on Facebook or Instagram have had on society, whether it's about what's true or false, or whether it's young women feeling bad about their body image. Those are society scale effects. So if we're really successful and do something that has that scale, we want to even think about what is the societal level potential effect of the thing I'm building, and how do I bring that all into my design process? So it really requires a different way of thinking about design, and it requires a different set of players on a design team. We need technologists who understand AI, we need designers, but we actually need social scientists, humanists, and domain experts, whether it's education, finance, or law, depending on what you're building, to be in those teams from the start. You simply can't bring people in at the end and say, hey, can you check whether this is safe or this is going to work? It's too late. They need to be on the ground at the beginning, and that affects what we will build. So human-centered AI is really a philosophy about how to actually create these systems to have positive impact for society in areas like this in education.
Great, thanks. Your social media reference is interesting. I've been thinking about, it's quite a contrast to think about 70, 80%, whatever it is K-12 students using ChatGPT to help them with their homework lately. And at the same time, 75% of elementary and middle schools banning cell phones in class. Amazing piece of technology, but lots of harms, lots of distraction, lots of risks. Tough to sit with both of those at the same time and figure out what to do.
Well, it's the early days, and I think we need to give ourselves a little time to try to get it right. Now, it is good that we figured out finally the negative effects of cell phones and social media and these things on our kids. And AI could have some of the same negative effects, but we could also think about how to use AI to help all of us flourish in the long term. And so how do we start to look at how to use this technology to have people reach life goals and behaviors, that are long term, instead of these quick actions that the technology right now is really designed for because of the advertising related model. And I think there's a lot of interesting research on how AI actually can help move our kids towards the long-term goals, move all of us to be focused on being better in ways that we all want to be. And so there's potential for it.
Great. All right, Ian, I'm going to turn to you next. Ian is a managing partner at Owl Ventures, the largest education-focused venture firm globally. And you've backed many of the companies that are shaping how AI shows up in learning and hoping it all scales, I assume. And so how do you approach this? What examples and themes are you seeing for human-centered AI?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank Isabel and the team for hosting this wonderful event here. It's just like a real full circle moment for me, having been on campus for 7 years across undergrad and grad school, and now talking about education with 3 young kids, I think is close to my heart every day. And so I have again, as I mentioned, sort of young children in public schools right now. Their teachers are grappling with with AI, how to use it, how to implement it. I talk to my son every day about it. What's going on at school? Does your teacher use this? How do they incorporate it into the classroom and what you're learning, or do they just ignore it? And so the key thing for what we're seeing at OWL is really around ensuring that this AI is really kind of built around the core of the teacher. And in many ways, we think about it as being a world-class, almost, TA and data analyst in a sense, for the teacher to really augment and amplify the effectiveness of the teacher, free up time, and allowing them to do, what they do best, which is to inspire and to engage and to really make that human connection with the student, but, informing them and arming them with all of the data, as well as some of the, again, real-time sort of feedback loops, in a, very heterogeneous, classroom environment, right? And so, we have, 100 portfolio companies that span across K-12 all the way through workforce, and this is a slightly more, I think, K-12 oriented audience, but I think the same applies to adults and adults learning as well, is that, the learner and the teacher, at the center of it all is really, really critical. A couple of examples I think that I can kind of pull from, we have a portfolio company called Newsella, which has been used by over 4 million teachers. And a big part of that is that, the teacher remains in the driver's seat. The teacher, has control over what content they want to use, but the AI actually is helping with the scaffolding and the, appropriate sort of reading levels for the kids. And so that sort of differentiation at scale, is helpful, and it allows the teacher to do, again, what they do best, which is to meet the students, where they are. One other example is a company called Kiddom, which really kind of integrates instruction, assessment, and curriculum all together into one platform, and really, again, helps the teacher sort of see the learning trends, not only in terms of, student by student, but also, across the classroom. I think, we've started to hear a little bit more about some of the, multiplayer, if you will, sort of AI elements, or how do you sort of get people into groupings and skill levels. Kiddom, as an example, fits into district workflows, fits into curriculum, and really sort of allows the teacher to, in real time, adjust, effectively kind of the learning and teaching curriculum to map what the needs of the students and the misconceptions that are being faced, by the students in the classroom. So a lot more examples, but I know we want to make sure everybody has a chance to share thoughts.
All right, great. Thanks, Ian. All right, and we'll turn to Amanda. Amanda mentioned there's lots of educators in the room. You can tell me whether you agree that they have the hardest job. I know you taught high school biology. Amanda's the CEO and co-founder of AI+Education and work very hands-on with public school systems across the country as they figure out what does responsible AI adoption actually mean and look like. So a bit where the rubber meets the road. How does this all land with you, and what are you seeing in your work?
Absolutely. Well, hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. This is a full circle moment for me as well. In February 2024, this is the first big panel I ever did. I had 5 minutes to talk about AI in education, and I watched it recently, and not that much has changed, which I don't know if that's really a very positive statement to start with. But I think that it's really important to think about human-centered AI with the question of, we have an arrival technology that's as disruptive as any technology ever. And not only disruptive, but faster in that disruption. That is starting to really force us to look at what is human. And not to get too philosophical to start, but skills, you talked about software engineering no longer being a barrier to ideation, development, and creating products. That we are looking at technology that is now outstripping abilities across pretty much every human skill. In fact, there's research that shows that it's not just that AI is augmenting or is going to automate out specific jobs, but within jobs, tasks are being both at the same time. And what we have to really think about is just how much disruption that's going to cause and who is making the decisions. We talk about some of the technology that's being built for schools, like how many of those organizations are really working hand in hand, not just with educators, but researchers, with students, with psychologists. One of the most fascinating parts of this is that almost half of all generative AI users are under 25. So I just want to say that again. So if you look at 800 million active users for ChatGPT, they've said that 40% of their users are under 25. That's over 300 million active users a month. We also see a really kind of interesting moment of synchronicity is that the first ever AI chatbot was in the 60s. And I'm sure some of you know Eliza. Eliza was a mental health chatbot. And now we look, 3 years into the time, and you talk about, the number of students using AI. They're more using AI for mental health and well-being than they are for schoolwork. And so we have this really fascinating moment where it's starting to be this mirror or reflection to what people want but maybe also what is missing, And I think that when we see young people and adults turning to these technologies for much more than we ever thought, it's going to really change what's necessary around supporting all of us. I mean, we see not just cognitive offloading that's happening, we see mental health and well-being being offloaded. There is a new paper came out about belief offloading. Is that what are we doing if these tools have been designed in a way in which they're actually shifting us into ways of thinking, especially at a really big risk, considering that we have 4 or 5 chatbot makers that are having such an outsized effect on what we use. And so I think when I think of human-centered AI, I think that this is an inflection point. This is the moment in which the choices we make today will have such outsized effects on not just education, but the ways in which we interact with each other, and what we prioritize and what we believe has value. And so I think for us, when we think about AI in education, the most important thing right now is that we need to equip people with the real knowledge and skills and mindsets to understand how to use these tools and to know when not to use them. I think this is a huge thing. We're going to have to make decisions in the future not to use AI. We're going to have to decide that even if AI can do this better than I can, it's important for me to do it myself. And I'm speaking a little bit to the young people in this room as well. That's going to be a really big question going forward. So I think for us, we were really pleased by the work that's being done, but we think we're at the very earliest stages.
Great, thanks. All right, I'm gonna give you some quick hitter, easy questions. Susan, how do we measure all of this? You mentioned the many pilots. You mentioned that there's many pilots designing. There's now infinite variations of planes, if I'm following the metaphor correctly, with the democratization of software development that you mentioned, and it's all moving so quickly. So what counts as credible evidence of impact? How do we learn from the different feedback loops that are necessary? And what are you seeing in terms of translating from all the other fields that you've worked in and how that applies to education?
Yeah, so I mentioned in my opening remarks about incentives, and it's very hard to provide incentives for things you can't measure. And also we know that if you measure one thing, the teaching to the test is the metaphor we use across all of science, in fact. And so here we are in education where we understand the problems of teaching to the test, and vendors may also build to the test. So this challenge is something I've been working on for 20 years. I did a stint as chief economist at Microsoft where I focused a lot on the search engine. And there, it was a very big challenge. The first thing I realized is you've got thousands of engineers, they're all building things. They're building for what you measure, and if you measure the wrong thing, you get the wrong thing. So it's easy to measure clicks. You can do an experiment in a day and see the clicks and make a decision tomorrow, which is great, but it leads to spammy ads and other stuff. And so you actually have a whole science team set up to figure out what to measure in this specific context and how to fight the teaching to the test, which includes things like peer review and human review in addition to these measurable, easily measurable numbers. As education moves to be more in this digital product space, you are going to want to make fast decisions. You do want your vendors to see that the teachers this interface isn't working and you want to be able to fix it tomorrow. So you do want to measure things fast and make decisions fast. Yet you have the same problems that, what does it mean if the teacher is spending more time in the interface? Is it because it's terrible and it takes them forever to get something done? Or is it because it's great and they're learning a lot from the experience? So that requires a multifaceted approach. And I think the Gates Foundation has been a pioneer. And in a lot of my speaking, I'm actually looking at some of Gates Foundation and other contexts like financial inclusion, where they've identified digital public goods that can have an outsized impact on ecosystems and country growth. I think in this space, there are also lots of digital public goods that could be provided here by university and philanthropy. They are the tools for testing. They're the tools for evaluation. It's multifaceted. It's going to be human review tools. It's going to be AI guinea pigs so that you don't have to make humans your guinea pigs. But actually making a good AI guinea pig is itself a science. Because if you have a fake student testing your product, but it does dumb things, that's going to lead your product in the wrong direction. So you have to evaluate your fake guinea pigs. So that's a little bit meta, right? So I see but this is not just like a small problem or specific to education. I actually see this as like the foundation of what it's going to take to make good AI products across the economy, is investing in the tools that help you understand whether the AI is doing what you want it to do. And by the way, even inside OpenAI, inside Anthropic, that's a huge scientific focus, is just how do you know whether you've done the right thing for your user. So I'm really excited about that science. That's been a theme at Stanford High, but in the specific education context, it's like even more important, because using students as guinea pigs is like, or teachers as guinea pigs is a, we don't want to make mistakes. We want to have a really robust measurement, testing, evaluation pipeline. And then just coming all the way back to the incentive point, if we can figure out these multifaceted ways to measure, then we can do a much better job incentivizing the vendors to experiment, measure, and improve.
Great. We are working on some of that evaluation stuff on our team. We usually say that the health teams, all those they got it much easier to measure over there. Education's much more complicated to measure. Great, thank you. I've got one more question for each of you, and then we'll head to the audience if we have time for probably just one or two questions. Ian, let me go to you, since you also are thinking about measurement as well, but from a bit of a different lens. You're thinking about, obviously you care about impact, you also care about scale, you care about financial returns. When you're you mentioned Newsela and Kiddom, they're relatively scaled, I'd say, in a way, but like if you think about some of the earlier stage organizations, what are some of the signals you're looking for to try to figure out, hey, is there the potential for impact and scale? I'm sure we've got some early stage organizations in the room. Ian will be right over there afterwards if you want to talk to him. How do you think about that?
Yeah, well, good news is all of these companies like Newsela and Kiddom at one point were early stage as well. So they've been through that journey. And I think, a good example, and another one just to kind of share with you, is a company called Amira Learning, which does oral fluency and reading and literacy. And they had the opportunity to be sort of grounded in research. So they had work that came out of Carnegie Mellon. They started to do essentially studies and independent evaluations in concert with state agencies, education agencies as well. And so they did that across Louisiana, across Utah, across Georgia. And in those ways, this sort of collaboration, I think, is really important. So it's not simply about, I think we do see a lot of companies where, the first sort of points of data all around usage and engagement, and that's sort of 80% of the conversation. But oftentimes there's a huge gap between usage and engagement and outcomes. And so the ability to sort of collaborate with third-party groups, I think, is really, really important. Kiddom right now is also doing the same thing in New York public schools. So they had, over 400 teachers and educators, implementing Kiddom and trialing it with, their students. And, they've put together a body of work now where essentially students in classrooms that have, teachers that are using Kiddom, 30 or plus times have double-digit gains. And, that sort of evidence-driven sort of fact pattern is really important before you make claims. And I think a lot of companies right now, especially early on, struggle with that dynamic of, how do I get that traction and how do I get the attention, to make these claims, but then not yet have the evidence. And so I think, finding the right, not only the pilots, but then the right districts, and ensuring that you're in that workflow, and then working in collaboration with the right third-party groups is just critically important to establishing that credibility and trust.
Great. James, let's talk about teachers for a moment. We've heard already a few times this morning, we want to make sure AI augments teachers. We're not replacing teachers. We want to make sure we're supporting them, we're augmenting them. Great, makes sense. How do we actually do that from a design perspective to focus on that specifically?
Well, I think it's also related to the question about evaluation. So, there's a field of learning sciences. There's a lot of great folks in that field right here at Stanford, from our dean, Dan Schwartz, on down. And so we need to make sure that we're applying those techniques to do this, not just ad hoc ways of measuring things. This is a field that with a lot of rich research on how to do it. But I would say one thing, supporting teachers or measuring things, what we really actually need to watch out for is, almost to paraphrase Wayne Gretzky, we need to go where the puck's gonna be, not where it is now. We can't be measuring the stuff that mattered for schools in the last century. This technology is going to change what we think kids need to know, whether it's in K-12 or in college or in lifelong. And we need to start rethinking what it is are the key skills. Now, some of them are going to go back to the classic skills that we might all think about, like critical thinking, how to make an argument, the basics. But it's going to go away from a lot of testing that is really how good you are at regurgitating information. And we have to first think about what is going to change, because a lot's going to have to change. And so once we know that, then we understand what it is we need to measure properly and use the learning sciences to do that. And similarly, how do I augment teachers? Well, I got to know what it is that's important to teach and important for kids to learn, because now if I have a smart, great tutor for kids, maybe some of these other skills aren't where they need help. Maybe it's more on the social skills and the other parts of life that teachers are going to maybe focus more on. But we have to figure that question out first before jumping to a bunch of solutions that in some ways are teaching kids for the Industrial Revolution.
Great. Amanda, let me finish with you. Could we talk about the Beyond the AI Inflection Point, your paper that you released recently? And would love to hear like a little bit more about it. But in that paper, you talked about a fictional school district, Central Schools, I think it was called, that if fictional, but maybe totally fictional in the sense that it was grounded in deep research that you did and thought about the 3 potential paths over the next 5 years that could happen, depending on the types of choices that those districts make. So tell us a little bit about what you learned from that research, but in particular, especially to close us out, what about that pathway where the guardrails are put in place? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? What are the most important types of guardrails and safety considerations that everyone in the room needs to be thinking about right now?
Absolutely. Well, I want to call out Jason from Imagine Learning. This was a guerrilla project, and Isabel Howe and we had Chris Agnew from Stanford. We brought a group of almost 20 people over the summer. Has anybody read AI 2027? It's this futurist piece about AGI, or superintelligence, being possible. And we were actually sitting on the floor of the AI show at ASU GSV and looking around all the point solutions that were measuring for today, not for tomorrow, to your point, James, and got a bit frustrated. And I was like, well, what if we do an AI 2027 for education? Which sounds like not that hard, guys. It was really hard. We wrote a fictional story that has a choose your own adventure approach, which none of us are fiction writers, so that was fun. But what we did is we brought together a really cross-functional group, including students, and came up with Central School District. And I'm glad that you felt like it felt real. We've worked with hundreds of districts, and so from 2023 to 2025, it should feel as real as possible. The complexity of even doing the good work of setting guardrails, starting to think about AI literacy, was just not enough. And so the big kind of piece of the Central District approach is starting a lab school in 2026 that becomes a skunk works for calculated risk taking, for measurement, evaluation, for trying to create a future where we're not just creating kids for a future that used to exist or one we think will exist. And what we do is we branch in 2027 where things get really hard, because education is really good at not changing. Like, we're just really, really stubborn. And so it becomes this kind of choice, and we have 3 paths that are followed. One is this kind of re-entrenchment of traditional methods. We go back to a place in which we're pen and paper, which is happening right now. And what happens is young people kind of come out not knowing, either not being AI literate and not also being like deep critical thinkers, because they're using AI at home and hidden in ways that are not very helpful. They're definitely not prepared to go get a job with Ian. So that's path A. Path B is focused on this kind of algorithmic all-in. We're going to pick an AI system. It's going to do everything, not just help students learn, but also it's going to surveil students, keep us safe. And what ends up happening is you have young people that are really it's stripping out the human that kind of interaction, of the human interaction and the durable skills that we want to see. And then past C is kind of the messy middle, where the lab school keeps going, and kids are more prepared to be agile than they are necessarily prepared to be an engineer or a technologist or an economist. They're going to learn the skills to keep learning, because it's never going to slow down from this moment on. And one of the things that I think is really important is that the guardrails are in place for all three of those, but the decisions of like how much are we willing to look at our like what works and doesn't work and make the change is really the more important piece. But I would say very much is that, the last thing I'll say is that a core component of everything, if there is one place that we should be thinking about in terms of guardrails, it's not responsible guidelines, it is AI literacy for young people. And it is technical AI literacy, it is understanding what these tools are and aren't, but it's moving from AI literacy to fluency. And if we do not do that in the next 2 to 3 years, starting that out, we are in a world of hurt. And so that to us is like the kind of the underlying for everything. We have to equip young people for the future that's coming.
That's great, thank you. There's a red clock flashing and staring at me. And so we'll defer on audience questions, but this is a small enough group. Please come find us throughout the day. We'd love to hear your reactions to this. Final words, 10 seconds or less. What's one thing you would love for this audience to do this year to make sure that human-centered AI becomes the norm?
James, you sir.
I'm just going to say this is one of the most important areas for AI. So we at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, as we plan our next 7 years, this is one of the 3 key areas that we are focused on with our friends at Stanford and other folks to really push forward, because this is really one of the most important areas for AI and the future of our world.
Awesome. Others?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just take a more personal stance at that question, which is, be involved and be sort of integrated into the community. I think this is a very select group here, of course, but it's obviously a much bigger world, and just making sure each of us sort of touches 4 or 5 educators, touches students, and really just involves everybody, because I think this is certainly going to be a group effort, to your point.
Yeah, I would say speak up. Like, this is the time to be loud. Like, this is time to, if you have, Newsella or others are coming in saying we want to do this, say why or how. Work with each other. If you're a young person, advocate for AI literacy in your organizations. If you're a teacher, like, talk to young people. I think that this is, like, everyone has a voice today if we're willing to do it. It's going to be, like, harder as we move forward. So I just think that this is a time to do it.
I would say that the bottlenecks now are sort of non-technical in some ways, and so everybody who has an idea, who has domain knowledge, who knows about a problem, has more kind of power and opportunity to do something that actually matters than almost any other time. Like, if I have an idea that requires, $100 billion to build, well, like, it doesn't really matter whether I have the idea unless I have $100 billion. But at this moment, there are so many ways that each individual human can actually take their ideas and help other humans. And so this is a great moment to be alive, but there's no guarantee that we'll actually take it across the finish line. So that's really what I'm focused on.
All right, thanks for a great conversation. Let's thank our panelists.